course, yesterday he got himself into all kinds of trouble. Once again, another problem that he created for himself, because it's the government of Labour that has decided to reframe this particular piece of legislation, which might allow for Gerry Adams to claim compensation from the British government and thereby from British taxpayers. Let's talk now to Kenny Donaldson, Director of SEF, which is the South East Fermanagh Foundation, a group of victims and survivors which was formed to help innocent victims of terrorism in Northern Ireland. Kenny, I imagine when you heard this story yesterday, you could barely believe your ears, could you?
Good morning, Mike, and thank you for having us on this morning. Yes, indeed. Obviously, this particular story was captured in the airwaves a number of months ago, and then at that point appeared to be dealt with, but obviously with the repeal and replace of the Act, which the Labour government committed to, this is an issue which has now returned to the table. I suppose we're very clear in this, Mike, that there was cross-party consensus at that stage that certainly should Gerry Adams not receive this particular compensation, and we will be pressing the government very strongly to stand by that particular pledge, because if this were to happen, it would further debase our society.
Yeah, I think there's no question about that. Let's have a quick look at what he said yesterday, Sir Keir Starmer, in the House of Commons.
Now it turns out his government may write a cheque to compensate Gerry Adams. Can the country afford 4 more years of his terrible judgments?
That act was unfit because, well, not least because it gave immunity to hundreds of terrorists and wasn't supported by victims in Northern Ireland, nor, I believe, by any of the political parties in Northern Ireland. The court found it unlawful. We will put in place this is a serious point, we will put in place a better framework. We're working on a draft remedial order and replacement legislation, and we will look at every conceivable way to prevent these types of cases claiming damages, and it's important I say that on the record.
The problem is, of course, Kenny, as I'm sure you're aware, is that they've created a different law, and they're now saying they're going to prevent people from accessing that law because of an individual circumstances. And I mean, you probably know as well as I do that when you get human rights lawyers involved in things, they tend to find loopholes and ways of getting money.
That's right, and I think, Mike, look, this goes to the heart of our discussion in so many areas of our nation's life at the moment, that essentially Parliament is sovereign, and we argue very strongly as a group that where you have porous law which is able to be manipulated for the benefit of nefarious reasons, then it's up to Parliament to actually plug those gaps. And we have a circumstance where there is actually an ongoing case against Mr Adams in the civil courts in England, taken by 3 victims and survivors regarding his interconnectedness with the Provisional IRA over the course of the terrorist campaign. That is the allegation that will be put before him. So these issues are very live, and I think anyone in the context of these issues in Northern Ireland knew that Gerry Adams was the leader of Provisional Sinn Féin. Provisional Sinn Féin and the Provisional IRA are the 2 legs of what is the Provisional Republican movement. The 2 are interconnected and wedded.
Well, it's ridiculous to try and say that they're not, isn't it? But is that the same case that in which he was represented by Lord Hermer, who happens to now be the Attorney General?
No, it's a different case. This is a more recent initiative which has been led by three victims and survivors in GB, and they've been very courageous to take this case, trying to illustrate from the point of the Old Bailey right through to the early 90s what his leadership role would have been within the Provisional Republican movement over that period of time. Now, that is all to be led before the court. We have to obviously make that very clear.
Absolutely.
But Gerry Adams, in terms of his name and his brand in the context of Northern Ireland and beyond, is toxic with these issues. And Mike, what I would say is that Gerry Adams and others wax lyrical about their commitments to reconciliation, their commitments to wanting to move society forward. I would ask the question to he and to many others, what is this all about? Because is it about financial need? It absolutely is not. This is driving a further wedge between our community here, and people are feeling very, 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 very sore when they see this on the news last night.
Well, of course, the victims must feel terribly badly hard done by, because they're not included in any of this, are they?
No, and we also, like, for your viewers across Great Britain, also as well as Northern Ireland, this is not limited to Northern Ireland, because often it is overlooked that there are over 130 innocents who were murdered across Great Britain in that very territory. But then if we take on board the regular army soldiers who were murdered in Northern Ireland while serving here, we're talking in the region of around about 550 to 600 people in addition. So it's a very significant tranche of people. And I suppose we would say to the people of Great Britain, don't consider this to simply be a Northern Ireland issue. This is a national issue. And this is about how does our state place itself in the world, and how is it understood? Are we seen to be a soft touch on these issues or not?
No, I couldn't agree more with you, and I'm absolutely making that point to them, because not only does it affect people whose families had victims of the IRA here, but it's also going to be British taxpayers' money that goes to Gerry Adams if he's successful in a claim.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And 6 figures is what's being talked about. But to me, the financial element of it, there will be a high price to pay if this is settled, and it won't be in monetary terms. This is about political terms. This is about the equation of a campaign where people who were involved wearing balaclavas and other such armaments of terror wish to be placed on the same footing as those who were legitimate members of the security forces of the state. This is this language of combatants. This is what we've been moving towards for a quarter of a century, and this weak government has appeased that until this stage. Successive governments, it has to be said.
Yeah, I know. We've moved the dial, haven't we? It's gone from, you know, oh, that's just your average terrorist, to, oh, well, that's just your English perspective on it. And actually the other perspective is completely opposite to that. And we now want compensation. Shocking. Listen, we wish you well, Kenny. Thank you very much indeed. We'll keep in touch as well. Kenny Donaldson there, director of SEF, the South East Fermanagh Foundation, collecting victims who suffered under the yoke of terrorism in Northern Ireland and who are facing no claims for compensation whatsoever. They're not allowed to make them, but Gerry Adams can. And of course, would you trust Keir Starmer when he says we're going to do our very, very best to make sure that Gerry Adams doesn't get any compensation? Because I wouldn't, that's for sure.